I have a question for you.
Okay.
When Spotify, you did Spotify, did you care when all that shit was going on with Spotify, with like the people revolting against you at Spotify? Or did you just not give a shit at all?
Well, the people at Spotify weren't. There was just a couple of people that were like tech people that were upset. But
So then how did that become such a big story?
The real story was the medical misinformation story. That's where things got weird. And there was a lot of people that were behind that. That you know, Democratic super PACs, and there was a lot of shit. It was like very organized. But that was because of having people like Robert Malone and Peter McCullough that were telling a narrative that was contrary to what was going on in the public about vaccines and about the efficacy and about the dangers and about COVID and the actual dangers of COVID, and also alternative treatments, whether or not they were effective, whether or not the information's being suppressed. That stuff got creepy. But
did you care? Is it more like, because you, from outside looking in, you had built this thing up all yourself, took a paycheck, but signed it over to Spotify. To me, that would be, I was curious what your thought process, were at any point you're like, I wish I just kept this myself. I don't need this headache. Or did?
No, because I would have done the same thing and I would have been banned from YouTube. I would have been in trouble in other ways. It was a matter of like a time where talking about certain things was very taboo, and I talk about everything. And when I had access to someone like Robert Malone, who owns 9 patents on the creation of mRNA vaccine technology, and that guy who got vaccinated was telling you about a terrible cardiac event that happened to him while he got vaccinated, and then him doing the research on mRNA vaccines and the benefits as well as the adverse side effects, and as well as what the actual studies showed in terms of efficacy, that the fact that they never really showed that they could stop transmission, that they were lying about that. It's going to stop it in its tracks. There was no information about that. In fact, there was a woman in Pfizer that had to talk to the European Parliament, and they asked her, like, did you do research to see if it stopped transmission? She said no. So all they knew is that it created antibodies, and everybody wanted the pandemic to be over. And everybody wanted it, and they figured, like, this is our way out of this. And it was like, that was the narrative. Rachel Maddow was like, if you get this vaccine, you won't get COVID.
Right.
You won't spread COVID. The virus stops with you. We all now know that is horseshit, and that's a lie. And this guy was telling me that over a year ago. And when I started talking about that, it became a real fucking issue. But my perspective was like, look, if it's true, it's true. And the chips will fall where they may, and if the only way people are getting this information is through me, that's fucking crazy. But that's also the cross I have to bear. This is what it is. I'm talking to this guy. I'm fascinated by it personally. I want to know. I mean, and he was wildly disparaged. So was Dr. Peter McCullough, wildly disparaged. But turns out he was accurate. And as more and more information gets out over time, it will show what happened, how they were suppressed, how there was active campaigns to silence them, and how those campaigns were funded. And that's what we're finding out right now. So it was an uncomfortable time for sure, especially when people like, fucking Neil Young, who I loved Neil Young. But Neil Young, I don't know if this is true or not, but somebody told me that after I released my video explaining how a lot of the stuff that they called misinformation in the past that would get kicked you off is now mainstream news, like the lab leak hypothesis. If you talked about the lab leak hypothesis on YouTube at the beginning of the pandemic, you would have been fucking canceled. They would have pulled you off of YouTube. They would have suppressed your episodes. They would have canceled. Now that's on the cover of fucking Newsweek. Right? And now most scientists and epidemiologists and virologists are pointing towards that as the likely scenario, that is a lab leak. I had Brett Weinstein, who is a evolutionary biologist, on yesterday, and he explained why that lab leak hypothesis is most likely correct in scientific terms that are like mind-boggling. So was it good? No, but it is what it is, and my perspective is, look, it could be. I'm in a very unusual and fortunate situation, and sometimes you find yourself in a place in life where you have to figure out what you're going to do. Are you going to not talk to these people because of pressure when you think these people are telling the truth, or are you going to let the chips fall where they may?
So that was over because from, again, totally outsider, it seemed like a big deal. Like it seemed like a big thing within Spotify. It seemed you're saying it wasn't as big, though. It was just small. Like you weren't getting that. For me, is the big. Almost all the stuff you said, whether it was true or not true, I think you believed it was true. That's all that kind of matters. It turns out a lot of it was, but it's there's similarities. You did it so long yourself, and then Spotify's under a ton of pressure. Like, didn't they delete some of your episodes?
Yeah. Well, they did that, and they also were very apprehensive about certain guests that I had on, and there was, a lot of pressure from advertisers. There was a lot of pressure from different people. They were, like different artists like Neil Young and Joni Mitchell pulled their stuff, and it was touch and go. But again, over time, it showed that that was all true, and then all that went away.
Yeah.
And so it was the right. Now, if I was wrong, now imagine if I was wrong, and imagine, well, not even me. I shouldn't say I was wrong because I wasn't really the one who was saying these things. These things were mostly being said by experts. But if those experts turned out to be horseshit, that would be devastating. Like if it did cause the death of millions of people because these guys were lying and these people didn't take something that could have saved them, and but it turns out that's not really the case. And it turns out there was alternate therapies and alternate different medications that were suppressed. Not only that, the information about simple things like vitamin D and exercise and the benefits of those things and how that was suppressed, about how obesity contributes to COVID, that was all suppressed. None of that stuff was being discussed. And
I'm wearing this now.
So it's just one of those things where you find out that the more things change, the more they remain the same. Pharmaceutical companies from the fucking beginning of their industry have been full of shit. They make great stuff. They make Adderall, you love it. They make Viagra. They make cancer medications that work. They make all these different things that are wonderful for people. All these different things that save people. But really what they're in the business of is making money. That's what they're in the business of.
100%.
And when something comes along that fucking steps on their money, they don't like it.
Yeah. It like I said, for me, it was almost the bigger issue of I was curious how you were dealing with it. Meaning,
or just keep on keeping on. Just keep doing it.
was that relationship ever close to being severed because of that, or no?
I don't think so. I don't know, though. I don't know from them. My relationship with them was always great in communicating with them. They stood by me the way they stand by rappers. And that was one of the things they said. Like, think about all the shit that rappers say.
But they stood by you for the same reason you're saying everything else. You make them money.
Yes.
Like
they
probably weren't standing by you because we think he's got smart guys, or Joe Rogan. We like Joe. They're staying by you because you're the biggest podcast in the world.
A friend of mine who's a brilliant businessman said, you have the #1 podcast in 96 countries. If you had the number 96 podcast in one country, you'd have been gone.
Correct. Yeah.
And that's correct.
Yeah.